Welcome to the Tri-City Regional Chamber's Membership Luncheon, Above the Fold, Business Outlook from the Other Washington, which is sponsored by the Tri-Cities Cancer Center. I'm Lori Mattson. I'm President and CEO of the Tri-City Regional Chamber. We're very pleased to be joined today by Chris Eiler, the Executive Director of the Northwest Region, Congressional and Public Affairs for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. The U.S. Chamber is the largest business advocacy organization in the world. They play an important role supporting a strong business community across the country. There's certainly a lot going on in the other Washington these days, and it can be challenging to stay on top of the issues and understand the impact they have on our community and on your business. The U.S. Chamber is a great resource for those federal issues, and we're really glad to partner with U.S. Chamber to keep you informed about these matters. Chris, we appreciate you being here with us today and appreciate your insight on these issues. At this time, I'd like to recognize the elected officials who have joined us for today's program. So I'd like to introduce you and ask if you would please stand, and you can stay standing. From the City of Kennewick, we have Mayor Pro Tem Don Britton. We also have Council Member Matt Binke. Port of Benton, we have Commission President Roy Keck and Secretary Bob Larson. From the Port of Kennewick, we have Commission Secretary Don Barnes. And from the Benton PUD Commission, we have Commissioner Lori Sanders. And then also a couple of special guests from Senator Patty Murray's office, Regional Director Raquel Farrell Crowley. And from Congressman Dan Newhouse's office, we have District Representative Josh Lozano. If I've missed anyone, please stand up. We'd like to recognize all of you. And if you could please join me in a round of applause and thank our elected officials for joining us today. And now if I could please ask you to stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks. You may be seated. At this time, I'd like to recognize our presenting sponsor, the Tri-Cities Cancer Center. We always appreciate their support, and they're such a great partner of the Chamber. And so at this time, I'd like to bring Michael Novakovich, who is the Director of Strategy and Business Development. Please help me welcome Michael.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Lori, thank you for that introduction. As mentioned, my name is Michael Novakovich, and I'm here today to talk about your colon. Hey, Todd, how old are you?
50.
You had your colonoscopy?
No.
Listen, my friend, starting age 50, guys at average risk need to have a colonoscopy. Fellas with a family history may need to start even sooner. Your tushy could be a ticking time bomb, my brother. Colorectal cancer is the third leading cause of cancer-related death in men. Colonoscopies can actually prevent colorectal cancer by removing precancerous polyps during the procedure. Get screened, be a man. Why, thank you. Well, the colonoscopy isn't just for guys. Ladies, it's for you too. And this is a pretty serious disease, as you would have seen in that commercial. It's the second leading cause of cancer death among men and women in the U.S. And what's the really sad thing about that statistic is colorectal cancer is one of the most preventable cancers out there. And it happens by having your colonoscopy. So here in our community, we have a significant concern. If you look at the graph behind me, what you're looking at, that the blue bars is national findings of colorectal cancer. The gray bars are Washington State findings. And that orange bar you see, that's what's happening in the Tri-Cities region. So you have a clear picture here. Stage 3, stage 4 is late stage colorectal cancer, and you can see we have a much higher incidence of late stage cancer here in our community. And again, pretty sad fact when you consider if you get your colonoscopy, we can prevent cancer, and this happens because precancerous polyps can be detected during that procedure and removed before the cancer forms, or we can find cancer early. And if we can find cancers early, we've got greater options to treat, to cure. People have greater quality of life. When you look at late-stage disease, particularly colorectal cancer, treating to cure isn't necessarily an option, often not an option, actually. Most people won't recover from late-stage colorectal cancer. We're providing treatment. It's called palliative care. We're treating to provide quality of life, maybe extend life, but it's not curative treatment. So if this disease is so serious, why aren't people getting screened? Well, one, they don't know the risk factors, and so we just mentioned them here. Second leading cause of cancer-related death, very preventable, or should we find it, if we can find it early, we've got greater treatment options. Some people believe that it's, you're only at risk if you've got a family history. Well, that is an elevated risk, but as we age, unfortunately, we're at higher risk. So if you're 50 to 75 years of age, this is something we strongly encourage you to get done. It's invasive. Well, the colonoscopy is kind of like Star Trek. They're going to go where no man's gone before. The upside, if there's an upside to this, is you're actually asleep while it happens. So it's no fuss, no muss, a collapse of time, you wake up, the deal is done. It's actually the prep that seems to be the barrier for most people. And no lie, the prep, it really makes you go.
It really makes you go.
Oh my gosh, it really makes you go.
Seriously, it makes you go.
So what's the big deal about getting a colonoscopy?
The procedure itself is no big deal.
It's the prep. It really makes you go.
Not really. It's no big deal.
It's not as bad as getting cancer, though.
It's kind of like a cleanse without the spa.
Bottoms up for those who care about you.
Yeah. Well, it is kind of like a cleanse without the spa, but here's the deal. We've got a spa in a box for you. All you got to do is visit BeHealthyGetScreened.com, sign up for our event on March 18th, and you're going to walk out with that box, the spa in a box, absolutely free. It's the right thing to do for your health, for your wellness. For those people that care and count on you, please do it for them. I have to ask, how many people have had their colonoscopy? Oh, yeah, winning. How about any of you folks due for a rescreening? There's some hands. Good. Honesty is a good thing. How about anybody in the room that's between the ages of 50 and 75 and never had their colonoscopy? Oh, there we go. I'll tell you what, we've got a special deal for you today. Oh yes, Renee, for you, on your tables, you can sign up. It's painless. You put your name, your contact information. Our resource coordinator is going to contact you, get you scheduled for this event. We really encourage you to do it. For you, those of you that are due for a rescreening, please sign up. Expedited pathway to get this done. Please tell those that you know and care about to get this deal done and help us improve community health. I mean, this is something we can do and take that late-stage disease you saw right off the map. Thank you for your time and attention today. Thank you for your continued support of the Tri-Cities Cancer Center. Bottoms up. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Michael. He has a way of making awkward things seem like fun, right? You guys just all ready to go race over there to that event? But we appreciate you sponsoring today's luncheon, and thanks to everybody here from the Cancer Center. It's always great to partner with you. So we're going to move on to our Member of the Month. Each month, our Chamber Awards and Recognition Committee selects a member business to recognize as our Outstanding Member of the Month. And this month, the Chamber is pleased to announce CG Public House and Catering as our Member of the Month. It's owned by longtime Tri-Citians Shirley and Steve Simmons, and it was founded in 1979 by Shirley's parents as the Wyatt Pancake Corral. In 1984, the restaurant was renamed the Country Gentleman, and in 1996, off-premise catering was added, which rapidly expanded their business. To accommodate lose the sound. Oh, no, there we go. Sound like we. To accommodate the growth, the restaurant moved to its current location on West Clearwater Avenue in Kennewick in 2006. I can't believe it's been 10 years. I thought for sure this was wrong, but Steve and Shirley are nodding their heads. Earlier this year, they officially rebranded as the CG Public House and Catering. CG strives to provide great food and takes pride in providing customers with superb service. Over the years, the Simmons family has also given a great deal back to our community through charities such as Meals on Wheels, March of Dimes, and the Tri-Cities Cancer Center Foundation. They're also longtime supporters of the Regional Chamber Chamber. Shirley, in fact, was our 2016 Athena Award winner, and Steve is a past chair of our board of directors, currently on our board, and is a former Government Affairs Committee chair as well. Their son Kyle is a frequent chamber volunteer, and many of their employees have been ambassadors over the years. Their service and dedication to our community is greatly appreciated, so please help me welcome Steve, Shirley, and Kyle to the stage to accept this month's award. So before we start our program, I'd like to bring up Elizabeth Holt, our Marketing and Membership Director, to present our new members with their membership plaques. Elizabeth?
Thanks, Lori. Like Lori mentioned, I'm here to announce some of our newest members who are able to join us today. So if I call your name, please approach the stage and receive your plaque from Lori and pose for a group photo. First, we have Christy Brisky with Phone Shop Tri-Cities. We have Criselda and Rolando with Soul Case Management. Steve Adams and Carla Hodges with Tri-Cities Delivered Goods. And we have Dr. Antonio Lopez with Tri-City Dental Care. Please join me in welcoming these new members. Next, I'd like to recognize some of the Chamber's longstanding members. The members I will mention have been members of the Chamber for 20 years or more. Payne West Insurance, Port of Benton, ALP Financial Planning, YMCA of the Tri-Cities, King Beverage, Conagra Foods, Wild Horse Resort and Casino, Ice Harbor Brewing, Teddy Bear Home Daycare and Preschool. Please join me in recognizing these longstanding members.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and again, welcome to our new members. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Chris Eiler, who is the Executive Director for Northwest Region Congressional and Public Affairs for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. In his capacity, he represents the U.S. Chamber throughout the states of Alaska, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Oregon, and Washington. Prior to joining the U.S. Chamber, Chris served as Education Counsel for the U.S. Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, where he advised Senator Mike Enzi of Wyoming on post-secondary education issues. Chris also has more than 15 years of legislative experience in Congress, working closely on health care, Social Security, and telecommunications for Senator Frank Murkowski of Alaska, Conrad Burns of Montana, and Congressman Kevin Brady of Texas. In his chamber tenure, Chris has become very familiar with the Tri-Cities, and we're pleased to have him here with us today. Please give a warm Tri-Cities welcome to Chris Eiler. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Lori, and thank you to the Tri-Cities Cancer Center for sponsoring me today. I think there's some weird correlation between me telling you what's going on in D.C. and my lead-in being a conversation about colons. So, yeah, and that's my sad attempt at a joke. So, anyhow, as Lori said, my name is Chris Eiler. I am the U.S. Chamber's Executive Director for the Northwest Region, and I am going to do my best to give you a sense of what is going on at the federal level in Washington, D.C., and how the business community and the U.S. Chamber intends to approach its agenda in the coming months and coming 2 years. But before I do that, I want to thank you all for your continued support of this Chamber of Commerce. The U.S. Chamber simply cannot do what it does without the backing and support of state and local chambers back in members of Congress, home districts, and home states. You truly are what reinforces the message we deliver to them in D.C. The first question our lobbyists always get when they go in to meet with a member of Congress is, what does the chamber back home think about this? And by you delivering that message here at home, that just amplifies what we're saying to them in D.C. So thank you very much. Before I get to what's going on this year, I want to talk about a couple of things that have carried over from the Obama administration, and that's namely the Department of Labor's overtime rule and the EPA's Waters of the U.S. rule. With regard to the overtime rule, I'm sure that many of you are aware that the Department of Labor last year finalized a rule to raise the threshold under which employees must be paid overtime to $47,476 per year. The U.S. Chamber and a number of other business groups challenged this rule in federal court. A federal court in Texas issued a nationwide temporary injunction blocking the Department of Labor from enforcing this rule. The Obama administration took steps to appeal that ruling. However, nothing was done in the court proceedings prior to the inauguration on January 20th. At this point, we do not foresee the Trump administration continuing to challenge that case, in which case the temporary injunction will remain in place and the old threshold of $23,660 will be the standing law. However, one thing to be aware of is that because that rule was finalized, it will still be on the books until the Department of Labor takes actions to do an entirely new rulemaking to either modify the threshold or take it off the books altogether. Likewise, with the EPA's Waters of the U.S. rule, this was the rule that the EPA put out to vastly expand the waters that they can regulate under the Clean Water Act. That was also challenged in court by the U.S. Chamber, a number of business groups, and a number of state attorneys general. The court issued a stay preventing the EPA from enforcing that rule while the litigation is pending. That litigation is still pending. The Supreme Court has actually taken it up to address a jurisdictional question in that case. However, as with the overtime rule, we do not foresee the Trump administration continuing to fight that litigation. So we are again in another situation where that rule is going to be in limbo. It's been finalized, but it's being blocked by the courts. It's going to take a rulemaking to get it off the books. We anticipate the Trump administration moving forward to do something to either modify that or take it off the books in the coming years. So stay tuned. As for the current Congress, the 115th Congress and the Trump administration, I think it's safe to say that the past 2 months have been interesting and frankly have gotten off to a bit of a rocky start. The congressional Republicans came into the new Congress in early January and they took very quick steps to begin the process to repeal the Affordable Care Act, which I'll go into a little more detail in a minute. And they actually passed chamber-backed legislation, the Regulatory Reform or the Regulatory Accountability Act, which is designed to bring more transparency and accountability to how rules and regulations are made. This is a piece of legislation that marks the first modifications to the Administrative Procedures Act in over 70 years. And it's also legislation that the Tri-Cities Chamber weighed in support of, and so we thank you for that. However, since then, since the inauguration, things have slowed considerably. And this has been exacerbated in part by a rocky start for President Trump, controversial executive orders, controversial cabinet nominees, and in recent weeks, some turmoil surrounding White House staffing. That being said, there is still a considerable amount of excitement in D.C. Unlike state legislatures, Congress is an ongoing body. It's more of a marathon than a sprint, and it's still very early in the process. And the Chamber and the business community remains fairly optimistic that we will be able to make significant progress on a number of our long-standing priorities. President Trump spoke a lot about these things during the campaign, and they fall into 3 buckets primarily. And that's tax reform, regulatory reform, and infrastructure. On tax reform, this is something that our members have been talking about for years now, that the current tax system is just a tremendous burden on their ability to grow their workforce, grow their business. There seems to be broad support both at the White House and in congressional Republicans to do something significant in terms of comprehensive tax reform. The Chamber's priority here is going to be focused on reform that leads to an overall simplified tax code that attracts foreign investment, attracts more capital for investment, and allows businesses to grow their employment base. We see lowering the corporate tax rate as well as the individual tax rate as the keystone to any kind of reform, as well as reform leading to a more globally competitive system, meaning moving from the current worldwide system of taxation that taxes revenue earned by American companies no matter where it's earned in the world to a territorial system that only taxes revenue earned within the boundaries of the United States. We want to see these types of reforms made permanent. We want to see them made comprehensively. And as I said, the overall goal needs to be a more simplified code that's more predictable and easier for companies and individuals to comply with. Related to that is regulatory reform. In addition to the tax code, the other thing that businesses constantly are telling us that is hindering their ability to grow is the current burden placed on them by thousands and thousands of pages of regulations. As I mentioned earlier, the Chamber has already made progress on its regulatory reform agenda in getting the House to pass the Regulatory Accountability Act. This addresses the rulemaking process for the most expensive rules, meaning rules with an economic impact of over $100 million. This bill would require rules of that level to be subjected to much earlier involvement from the public, on-the-record administrative hearings, require agencies to release the data they're relying on when they make these regulations so that the public can scrutinize that data, and also require agencies to adopt the least costly regulatory solution that achieves congressional intent. As I said, the House has already passed this legislation. The Tri-Cities Chamber weighed in support of this legislation, and we're hopeful that the Senate will take it up in the coming months. But in addition to simply reforming the process of regulating, we want to see Congress start to go back and look at the regulations that are already on the books. There's, as I said, there's thousands and thousands of pages of regulations that are on the books that have not been revisited in decades. We want to see some of these regulations either revised or withdrawn altogether because they just simply don't apply to 21st century America. The House has already taken up a number of the regulations that the Obama administration pushed out in the final days of last year, using an expedited procedure to negate those regulations. But most regulations that are on the books are going to take more time to go through and either modify or repeal. And then finally, infrastructure. This is an area where we think there is a generational opportunity to make significant investments in the nation's transportation system. President Trump spoke at length during the campaign about his desire to see large investments in infrastructure, and there seems to be broad bipartisan support from both Democrats and Republicans to make progress here. The Chamber's priority is going to be twofold. First, we want to see projects funded that address our national need for economic growth. And by that, I mean projects that help commerce move across this country and internationally. We want to see things funded like airports, seaports, intermodal transportation links, broadband, an improved electrical grid, things of that nature. We don't want to see something similar to what we saw back in 2009 with the stimulus bill that was more of filled with a lot of earmarks, but not projects that address our broad national need for economic growth. Likewise, we want to make sure that these projects are funded with a reliable, dedicated funding stream. Historically, this has been done through the Highway Trust Fund, which raises money through the federal gas tax. That federal gas tax has not been raised for almost a quarter century. We believe that the best way to address this is a modest, phased-in increase to the federal gas tax. However, we are open to any and all suggestions on how to raise that revenue so long as that it is a stable source of revenue. Beyond those three issues, the other issue that's going to get a lot of attention in the coming months is the Affordable Care Act. As I said at the beginning, Republicans began the process to repeal the Affordable Care Act. But at this point, that is about the only thing that there is any agreement on. There is currently no agreement within House Republicans on how to, first, repeal the Affordable Care Act, and second, what to put in its place. On top of that, there is no agreement between House and Senate Republicans on how to move forward in this process. And on top of that, President Trump is not giving much guidance in how he wants to proceed here. So we're in a situation where there's a lot of talk, but right now, no one really knows how they're going to get from point A to point B. House Republicans have said that we will see some sort of outline about their replacement plan either this week or next. But if you've been watching the news lately, a lot of them are getting hammered pretty hard at their town hall meetings by people who are opposed to repealing it altogether. On top of all of that, The mechanism they have chosen to repeal the Affordable Care Act is called budget reconciliation. They don't have enough votes in the Senate to do this through regular order, so they're using budget reconciliation, which is an expedited procedure that allows them to legislate using only 51 votes to move this. The problem there is that you have to keep in mind is budget reconciliation is a budgetary tool. That means that everything that they do has to have some sort of budgetary impact. That's going to constrain how much they can do as far as repeal, and it will constrain them even more so on what they can do to put in place a replacement. So they're in a tough spot. And the U.S. Chamber, while we did oppose the initial enactment of the Affordable Care Act over the past 7 years, we have spent our energy trying to make it better and address what we see as the shortcomings in the law. Until we see a viable replacement plan, we are going to continue to focus on our priorities in the healthcare space, which is permanent repeal of the Cadillac tax, permanent repeal of the medical device tax, permanent repeal of the health insurance tax, and making sure that any tax reform continues to protect the preferential treatment that employer-provided health plans are provided under the current code, which 177 million Americans receive their health insurance through. So beyond those 4 issues, that's going to be where you see most of the action in the coming year. But there are a number of other issues that we have been prioritizing for years that we will continue to press forward on. Tops on that list is international trade. International trade took a tremendous beating over the past year in this campaign. President Trump came into office and immediately withdrew the U.S. from the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, and he's been talking more and more about pulling out of NAFTA. This is a very big concern for the U.S. Chamber. Trade is a significant part of our economy. The U.S. currently exports over $3.9 trillion in goods and services, supporting over 40 million jobs, 14 million of which are tied to trade with our NAFTA partners. Washington State alone exports $86.4 billion in goods, supporting 430,000 jobs in the state. 17,000 of those jobs are here in central Washington. This is not something that we can simply pull away from. We see an opportunity here. President Trump, while he has been very opposed to TPP and NAFTA, has expressed a willingness to engage in trade. He says trade is good. He just wants to see more bilateral agreements. We're gonna take this as an opening to educate him, to do more, to make sure there's no further harm is done, to prevent him from pulling out of NAFTA, and start trying to rebuild the momentum we had prior to the election to start doing more trade agreements. Likewise, we are going to continue to press forward on our belief that Congress and the President need to begin taking seriously the need to begin reforming our entitlement programs. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest on the debt are currently consuming over 70% of federal spending. That's projected to grow to over 95% by the middle of the next decade. That's simply unsustainable, and it's going to lead to reduced economic growth. And the longer we wait to address it, the more difficult and more painful it is going to be when we have no choice but to address it. So we want to see President Trump and Congress start working on something now. We don't have any specific proposals, but we want to see a genuine conversation started with the intent of starting to get something done in this space. So with that, I want to give you all some time to answer questions. As I said, it's still very early in this process, and there still are a lot of questions to be answered. The first question on top of everyone's mind is whether President Trump can indeed work well with congressional Republicans, and vice versa. How much are conservatives in Congress going to, how patient and how flexible are conservatives in Congress going to be with President Trump, as well as with their own leadership? To what extent will congressional Democrats be willing to work with congressional Republicans? And at what point are the 2018 midterm elections going to start to impact the ability of Congress to get anything done? It's going to be a particularly difficult cycle for Democrats in the Senate. There's 25 Democratic senators up for re-election versus only 8. The conventional wisdom right now is that Democrats are going to be able to run successfully against President Trump, but the numbers in the Senate are pretty daunting for Democrats to overcome. 25 Democrats to 8 Republicans is a big difference. As for the Washington State congressional delegation, keep doing what you're doing with Congressman Newhouse. He has been a great ally for us in Congress. And as for Senators Murray and Cantwell, while we don't always agree with the two senators, we have found them to be very reasonable and open to working with us. Senator Murray was instrumental in the business community's efforts last year in seeing that our concerns were addressed in the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So, as I said, Republicans only have 52 votes in the Senate, so nothing is going to move without Democratic votes. So it means that's all the more important that you're engaging your entire delegation, relaying the business community's concerns, relaying your concerns, and making sure that they are taking those concerns seriously and addressing them in the legislation they're considering. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Steve.
So you mentioned trade, which is a big deal to Washington. 40% of our jobs depend on trade. The other thing which you didn't mention, was immigration. In Washington State, if a farmer got his crop in, he probably used undocumented workers. And many of our tree fruit farmers let fruit die on the tree because they can't harvest it. Is the chamber working on immigration reform beyond what's happening right now with getting criminals out?
Right. The question was, what is the U.S. Chamber doing with regard to immigration reform beyond what you're hearing currently from President Trump? With regard to what the executive orders, we are hearing a great deal from our members who are concerned about the executive orders. We have not formulated our position yet. We're listening to our members. We're at the stage where we're listening to our members. But more broadly, the Chamber has been very out front on the need for comprehensive immigration reform. For the past 4 or 5 years, we've been very specific that something needs to be done to reform the current visa system, both for workers coming in at the higher end, high-tech workers and whatnot, as well as workers who come in to work in the construction and agriculture areas. The current system isn't working well. It takes forever for workers to get visas, and it doesn't allow enough workers to come in to meet the needs that our employers need. We also have taken the position over the years that something needs to be done to put the 11 to 12 million undocumented immigrants in this country on some sort of path to legalization. It simply is not realistic to round these people all up and send them back to where they came from. They're here, most of them are working, most of them are contributing to our economy. We need to do something to bring them out of the shadows and put them on a path to legalization. So whether that message is going to be heard with this president remains to be seen, but it is something that we are continuing to push forward on. Anything else? Well, all right. Well, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to come and listen to me. And as I said earlier, please continue to support the Tri-Cities Chamber. This is one of the better chambers that I have the pleasure of working with in the region. And Lori is one of the best chamber executives. So thank you.